We often say that an informed investor is a successful investor, but the big question is, how do you become an informed investor? There's lots of discussion on social media. You may hear some chatter amongst your friends, and there may even be some news articles published about stocks and companies you're interested in. But personally, I think one of the best ways to become an informed investor is to go straight to the source and look at company filings. But what are company filings? What are the different types of them? How do we find them? And most importantly, how do we interpret the information in them to use to our advantage to become a more informed, successful investor? In this video series, we're going to go through those points and answer all of those questions. So without further ado, let's get into it. Welcome back to Hourglass Trader, where as time passes, we make money. So of course, the first step we're going to need in analyzing the company financial statements is actually finding the company financial statements. And anytime you need to perform research, this is one of the best places to start. We're starting with trusty google.com. So you're going to search SEC Edgar company search. Type that in there. You're going to click on that first link, and what it's going to take you to is the SEC's website, where all companies, publicly traded companies that is, list their financials and company filings. You're going to type AAPL because we're going to use Apple for this example, and I feel like there's probably something wrong with using a Google search on a Bing browser to find Apple information, but we're going to make this work. And this is the company search result page you're going to get for Apple. You're going to see out to the right, this is what we're worried about here. We've got 8Ks, we've got 10Ks and 10Qs, we've got proxies, and then there's ownership disclosures. What we're worried about from a financial perspective are the 10Ks and the 10Qs. Of course, as labeled, these are the annual reports and the quarterly reports. 8Ks are current reports, which represent, significant events, pretty boring changes in executives, sales of notes. I mean, for the purpose of the example, we can click on the most recent one here. And I think if you scroll down, it's the issuance and sale of, more notes. So nothing terribly relevant to you as an investor who's trying to maybe get an idea of the background of the company, get an idea of whether or not a company is worth investing in. So if we go down to the 10K and the 10Q, we are going to use the 10K, the annual report, and click on this right here. And that's going to take us to the title page. I'll zoom in a couple clicks because I think my monitor might be a little bit big for the screen. And here we go. One thing that you're going to want to look at first, and probably the most important bit of information here on the title page, is the date. This is for the fiscal year ended September 24th, 2022. So if you're comparing year-end FY22, to year-end FY21, just know that that year is ending in September. Not every single company, most do, but not every single company ends their fiscal year on December 31st. So if we scroll down, what we're going to quickly get to is the table of contents. And we're quickly going to talk about most of these items on here and how they relate to you as a potential investor in the company and you as someone who's trying to perform some research on the stock. And item one, business right here, if we click on this, these are all hyperlinks. They're going to get right back down to that part of the filing. It's a very good place to start. A lot of us are familiar with a company like Apple, but if you're not familiar with Apple or you've heard about, X ticker and you want to look that up and figure out what they're all about, this is a fantastic place to start, right? Again, a lot of us are familiar with what Apple does as a business, but it describes what they do, describes their different products, different services, markets and distribution, and competition. I mean, you can kind of go down the list, but it's a very, very good place to get some high-level information about what the company is and what they do. Shortly under that, and if we go back up, this is going to be the next section on the table of contents, we have risk factors. This is another very interesting place to learn and read a little bit more about the company. This is more of a CYA activity by the company because there's a lot of different risks here, right? The company's business can be impacted by political events, war, terrorism, etc. The global markets for the company's products and services are highly competitive and subject to change, and the company may not be able to compete in these markets. They've got all sorts of business risks. And one mistake I find a lot of people making is you could very quickly tell who has and has not read a set of financials before based on how people respond to the risk factors. Because I'll see on social media every now and then some people will say, oh, this company mentioned that they can go bankrupt. This company mentioned that they might be insolvent. This company mentioned XYZ. Why is no one talking about this? And the answer is because pretty much every single company has disclosures like that in this section. Now, there are some disclosures that are more specific to the company and can be useful to have, in the back of your mind as you're investing, because it's always important to understand what could go wrong in an investment, because that's going to help you be more confident in holding it long term if it comes to that. But moving further down here, to further that example of someone saying, oh, this company has this disclosure about insolvency in the risk factor section, that's really worrying to me. We could actually look through here, and I think Boom, right here. The company's operations and performance depend significantly on global and regional economic conditions, and adverse economic conditions can materially adversely affect the company's business, results of operations, and financial condition. And what we have right here is that, in addition to the adverse impact on demand for the company's products, insolvency could be a potential risk. And again, this is Apple, right? This is the largest company in the stock market. They have over 100 billion in cash and cash-like items on their balance sheet. They're probably the furthest company from insolvency, yet insolvency is disclosed as a risk. So just know that when you go into that. That's kind of the big takeaway for the risk factors section. A lot of good info in there, but don't let anything in there, scare you too much, because a lot of it is just kind of boilerplate CYA type material. So that takes us back to the table of contents. Unresolved staff comments, properties, not terribly important. We go into legal proceedings, and this is an area that's a little bit more important. You'll notice that they detail, and most companies will detail, any pending litigation that they may have on an ongoing unsettled basis. So they've got a lawsuit filed with Epic Games. And this lawsuit was settled in favor of the company. However, it's being appealed and is currently working through the courts. So there's not a lot of visibility maybe into what might happen right there, but any pending settlement that the company could owe, that's of a material amount, is going to be listed right here. And of course, if you're holding this as an investment, not to say that this is the case specifically with Apple, but if you look up a company's filings, you go to the legal proceedings section, and you see, they've got outstanding litigation against X or against Y. If there is a ruling against them and they're forced to pay out a large settlement on a short to medium term basis, that ruling is going to hit the news wire and could have an adverse impact on the stock price. So it's important to have those items, however likely or unlikely they may be. It's important, again, just like the risk factors, to have them in the back of your mind to make sure that you're comfortable with all the facts surrounding the company you're potentially investing in. And that takes us back up to the table of contents. Safety disclosure is not terribly important. Some of the equity structure is going to be laid out over here. If you really want to look into that, you can, but not terribly important. Again, the next significant item for someone who's potentially looking at a company's financials for purposes of investment is going to be item 7 here, management discussion and analysis, or MD&A. So there's a lot of different points in here, and again, furthering the discussion of, I want some background about this company, not just the operations. This delves a little bit more into the numbers and provides a little bit of background and color into the actual numbers they're presenting, on the financials, the income statement, the balance sheet, statement of cash flows, etc. So we could scroll down here. They've got fiscal year highlights. They talk about increases in net sales, talk about quarterly performance, along with some bullet points about products that were introduced and different performance related items during those timeframes. We've got discussion around COVID-19 and how the pandemic has affected the company, but you kind of get the point, right? You may look at a figure on the financial statements and say, hey, this company has net sales of $394 billion. What is the breakdown of that? And then you've got the breakdown right here between iPhone, Mac, iPad, wearables, and services. So you can get a better idea of where the company's generating their revenue, right? Majority of Apple's revenue, $205 billion of the $394 billion, over half of it comes from the iPhone. So we keep scrolling down. We've got a lot more discussion about different segments. If you want to say, hey, what countries or regions is Apple generating most of their revenue from? Boom, you've got that right here. That same $394 billion, have it divided between Americas, Europe, China, Japan, and the rest of the Asian Pacific region. So that's why this MD&A section is particularly useful, because it kind of cuts a little bit deeper than those surface level figures that are presented on the income statement, the balance sheet, etc. So you're really kind of able to dig into the numbers if you're worried about certain trends, products, etc. Potential forecast items I think are talked about here a little bit as well. We've got a breakdown of what goes into other income, other expenses. They talk about liquidity, right? We remember from the risk factor section that, hey, they mentioned insolvency as a risk, but you could read through liquidity and capital resources here and find out very quickly that they've got cash, cash equivalents, unrestricted marketable securities. Again, over 100 billion as of the year end for FY22. They've got debt laid out here. And that's about it for the MD&A. You could read as much or as little of it as you like, depending on, the level of satisfaction from the information you get. And if you keep scrolling a little bit below this, we're going to get into the financial statements and supplementary data section, which we're not going to talk about in this video because, of course, if you're trying to read financials like an investor, there's so much individually to talk about: the balance sheet, the income statement, cash flows, etc. So we're going to set aside a couple extra videos after this is part of this video series to, dive a little bit deeper into those, how to read those, and, how to interpret those from the perspective of an investor. So back up to the table of contents, and you'll see that after skipping through, because we'll come back to it, this financial statement section here, we've got some directors, executive officers, corporate governance type sections. There's not a lot going on here, but one thing that I do kind of find particularly interesting, and one thing that you may as well, is the discussion about corporate governance, executive compensation. While it's not necessarily laid out in this 10K, a lot of companies you'll see it right here, but what you'll notice is the information required by this item will be included in the 2023 proxy statement. We may remember, hey, we're looking at the 10K right now. How do we find the proxy statement? We remember back on that company search page, it's right here, right below the 10K and the 10Q, we've got these proxy statements. So if we were curious about owner compensation, we could pop this thing open and you'll see we've got like 500 pages of this. So if you Command F for compensation, that's going to be a very quick way to find it. Kind of start working your way through here, hit enter a bunch, ignore the dead air right here. But boom, we click compensation, we go to the link, and we've got this executive compensation section on page 41 of the proxy statement, which again, we were directed to by this little footnote here from the 10K. And if you're really curious about what's going on with their compensation committee, they have some words that they put forward that detail who is part of that compensation committee. And of course, the part that I find most interesting, if you scroll a little bit further down, is you could find out how much the executive officers of the company are making. So for example, for FY22, the total compensation target for Tim Cook was $84 million. I would love $84 million. He makes a lot of money. And then 23 is going to be $49 million. Tough break. He got a little bit of a salary cut. But you could go down and they kind of do the same thing. They talk a little bit about how that number's arrived at. Whether you do or do not disagree with that is probably a different story. But I think it's always some useful color around the performance of the company, and we talk a little bit more about non-CEO employees here as well. So that's the proxy statement is always kind of an interesting little read, even though, as you can see probably out to the right here, it's a lot longer of a read as well. But there's some good little nuggets in there. But top to bottom, that gets us pretty much back down again to the end of it where we have the exhibit and the financial statement schedules, which we will cover in parts 2 and 3 of this video series. So there you have it. After watching this, hopefully you guys are able to, one, identify a company and be able to locate their company annual financial statements, again, the Form 10K, and know a little bit about what's going on, whether it's being able to uncover what's going on with the business, being able to uncover a little bit more about some risk factors with the business, understand what's going on the 10K with regards to some more detail around the numbers in Section 7, the MD&A, and even find some interesting little nuggets like poking around the proxy statement to find things like executive compensation. So if you've reached the end of the video, appreciate you watching and supporting us. Part 2, discussing the income statement, which is much more relevant information for finally making that investment decision, is up next. So please like the video, drop us a comment if you enjoyed the video. We've got a Discord server, www.hourglass-trader.com if you want to follow the rest of what we got. But until next time, thanks for watching. And this has been the Hourglass Trader, where as time passes, we make money.